My Lords, now I want to focus on the unintended consequences that flow from the 16 words in the order that place an arbitrary cap on our nation's economic potential. There are hard truths that need to be told about the practical effects, which include incentivising the importation of the most polluting products whilst jobs are lost at home. Now, my Lords, I don't deny the importance of decarbonisation. The oil's going to run out eventually, but setting a 535 million tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent cap from 2028, more than a whole decade away, in a world of uncertainty, is to take a path that makes our people poorer and counterintuitively make global emissions worse in the rest of the world. Now, I declare my interest as someone involved in the fertiliser trade, and whilst I don't produce it, I'm involved in the trade that brings it to our shores. And it's always useful to follow the money. And from 2013 to the end of 2025, just last year, EU ETS auctions have raised over €258 billion in revenue for the EU. In 2025 alone, just last year, the ETS revenues totalled more than €43 billion. This is a tax gusher, dressed up as environmental virtue signalling. And on that basis, it's hardly surprising that the EU has introduced trade barriers to keep everybody else out, and now the UK wants to follow suit. Let's deep dive into the industry I know best, which will be subject to insane fertiliser taxes from next January. You see, I know about the carbon budgets and the paraphernalia that flow from it, the emission trading system, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, free allowances, and default values that bizarrely will create powerful fiscal incentives to send the most polluting fertilisers to the UK. They all sound so good in theory. The CBAM and its evil twin, the ETS, are making us structurally uncompetitive. And as a double whammy, the way that Britain has chosen to implement them in the UK, like VAT, is architecturally incompatible with the EU system, which relies on permits and registries. These orders tie us to the EU ETS, but there are many other ways in which the UK ETS differs from the EU one. Not only is it euro-denominated versus sterling, the UKA versus the EUA, reflecting two different economic territories, no CBAM hedging liquidity in this country, all sorts of arbitrages that place the UK at a competitive disadvantage, and a willful refusal to provide the clarity on free allowances, which the EU is now diluting, but which are essential to enable future trade in our country. I ask, why would we tie ourselves to the EU via the Draft Climate Change Act 2008 credit limits order, which is so incompatible with the UKA, the sterling and default values? This isn't dynamic alignment or mutual recognition. This is fossiling our future based on today's values in an uncertain world, putting a cap on our country's ambition and capability. And the risks are that if the EU changes the goalpost for any of the carbon components, and they are, at the moment, we are left at a comparative disadvantage all the way for the next 15 years. The EU has seen us coming, something our government can't see for itself. Why are we running towards this danger, I ask? Worse, we are hard-coding numbers 12 to 16 years hence, yet the Chinese, who don't share our worldview, have unilaterally changed the way in which they calculate carbon emissions, leaving us high and dry up that proverbial creek without a paddle. And the naive, good chap way in which we have chosen to account for carbon in the divergent ways to the EU and the rest of the world will make us the natural dumping ground for the world's most polluting fertilisers. Success was never meant to be like this. In the last 2 months, the Chinese have reversed a fertiliser export ban and turned coal-fired urea production up to 11 to exploit global shortages. Our proposed default carbon values, which flow from these orders, provide the perverse incentive to import these polluting products at the expense of cleaner products. The system of free allowances has diverged into an Alice in Wonderland fantasy land, where there is just the aim of levelling a playing field, will be taxing the imports of certain carbon-intensive goods that aren't even made in this country. All that does is drive inflation. And the UK is proposing free allowances for fertiliser industry that doesn't exist in this country anymore, making farmers pay even more for their most expensive input. That is clearly contrary to the WTO and the rules-based order the outgoing Prime Minister purports to support. It's madness. And last week, the EU extended carbon taxation to be announced on secateurs and gardening tools. I asked the virtue signallers to accept that by making the UK feedstocks uncompetitive, by forcing our highest energy prices on our chemical industry, they will actually increase global emissions by outsourcing production to more poorly regulated nations, throwing thousands of Britons onto the dole in a crust industrialisation so that members of the Labour Party can virtue signal how green they are while sipping the Gronies on their step-free bifold access terraces grazing tofu picked up on at Whole Foods. The facts are that for everybody else, these carbon budgets and taxes are driving up the cost of beer, biscuits, bread, butter and barbecues. I hope the Mancunian Messiah recognises this simple truth in the coming weeks.
Yeah.